In today's episode, I'll be telling you all about Beulah Annan and Belva Gaertner. While I tell it to you, I'm gonna make a Reuben sandwich. You can find the recipe in the description below. Where are all of our Broadway fans at? Hopefully watching this episode, because today's story revolves around the true story of the musical Chicago. That's right, Roxy and Velma aren't completely made up. Their characters are based on two murderesses named Belva and Beulah who iced their booze back in the 20s. Now, they may not have sung Cell Block Tango after doing so, but their stories are just as enthralling, if not more. First, I'm gonna start off with my marinade. It's a combination of beet juice, pickle juice, and a spice mixture, and then I'm gonna marinate my seitan in it. Before writing the script to the hit play turned musical Chicago, aspiring playwright Maurine Dallas Watkins actually worked as a reporter for the Chicago Tribune. Maurine only worked there for 6 months, but during that time frame, she was assigned to cover the Cook County Jail's infamous Murderess row. All of the male reporters passed on the piece because they thought it would be too boring to report on. Little did they know it would make Maurine millions of dollars. Sorry, boys. So if you've ever heard of a story and thought, wow, this sounds like it's straight from a movie, that's exactly what was running through Maurine's head when she reported on Beulah Annan and Belva Gaertner. These femme fatales both snuffed their boo-things, and Maurine knew their stories were too good not to share with the world. First up, we'll talk about our girl Beulah. And let me just say, it's a good thing they changed the girls' names in the musical. Can you imagine a character getting up and singing, "The name on everybody's lips is gonna be Beulah," or Belva? It just doesn't have the same ring to it. Anyway, here's a quick rundown on Beulah's life leading up to her crime. She was born in a rural Kentucky town in 1899. At age 15, she married a dude named Perry. They had a kid together, but after Beulah got in a car accident with some other dude, Perry divorced her and took custody of their child. Yikes. Beulah then moved to Louisville, where she met a mechanic named Al. They fell in love, moved to Chicago, and got married in that order. After the move, Al got a job at a mechanic shop, while Beulah got a bookkeeping job at Tennant's Model Laundry, which is where she met a man named Harry. Harry was a laundry wagon driver and an ex-con with a history of harming women. Whether Beulah was unhappy in her relationship with Al or somehow charmed by Harry, she decided to cheat on her hubby by pursuing an intimate relationship with Harry. And that brings us to the crime. On the morning of Thursday, April 3rd, in 1924, Harry called Beulah to say he was going to pick up a bottle of something strong and was going to come over when he knew Al was gone. For some reason, Harry actually stopped by Beulah's place to get money for the booze instead of just paying for it himself. After throwing back quite a few glasses, the two started to run low on their supply, so Beulah gave Harry $6 to run over to the store for more. But before he could do so, Beulah began poking at Harry, teasing him for being a criminal. She called him names like jailbird and four-flusher, which is the 1920s way of naming a con man. Ooh, that's a good one. I'll have to save that for the next argument I find myself in. Harry, who didn't seem to like these nicknames, began to hit Beulah back with insults. He called Beulah no good and said he was going to leave her and end their relationship once and for all. The details of what happened next is a little wishy-washy, but basically the fight continued to escalate until Beulah reached for a firearm, aimed straight for Harry, and pulled the trigger. After Harry was snuffed, Beulah freaked out and did exactly what any other panicked executioner would do. Turn on a phonograph and play the song Hula-Loo on repeat for a few hours while continuing to drink. Clearly that first part was a joke. I've never heard of a criminal who stays at the scene of the crime and plays music for 2 hours. Beulah must have really been in a state of shock. Right before 5 p.m., Beulah snapped out of her drinking and listening to music phase and called Al. She told him that a man was trying to forcibly seduce her, so she whacked him. Al was obviously super worried, so he rushed home and phoned the cops. When the cops showed up, Al apparently tried to take responsibility for firing at Harry, but the cops didn't buy it, so they pulled Beulah aside to hear her side of the story. Beulah first acted like she barely knew Harry. She said he was making a bunch of advances at her, but she tried to turn him down, and he didn't let up. As Harry continued to get closer, she grabbed the firearm on the bed and sent a bullet to Harry's back, which she claimed was an act of self-defense. Beulah told the officers all of this when she was still plastered, so they let her sober up for a bit, and that's when her story changed. She told investigators, "You are right. I haven't been telling the truth. I'd been fooling around with Harry for 2 months. This morning, as soon as my husband left for work, Harry called me up. I told him I wouldn't be home, but he came over anyway." She then told him all about the drinking and fighting and basically said it was him or me. By that, Beulah knew the fight was spiraling out of control, and if she didn't reach for the weapon that was lying on the bed in plain sight, Harry would. After the bullet hit Harry, he fell back against the wall, and Beulah just watched. At the time, Hula-Loo was already playing on the phonograph, but when it ended, Beulah said she couldn't handle the silence, so she just kept playing it over and over again. Beulah then washed the fluid off her hands, wiped Harry's face with a washcloth, and gave him a kiss. For the next few hours, she said, "I just kept going back and forth between the living room and the bedroom where Harry's body lay and playing the phonograph." So at this point, you're probably wondering what her husband had to say about all of this, right? I know I am. That night at the police station, Al reportedly told the officers, "I've been a sucker, that's all. Simply a meal ticket. I worked 10, 12, 14 hours a day and took home every cent of my money. We bought our furniture for the little apartment on time and it was all paid off by $100. I thought she was happy. I didn't know." Yeah. What a slap in the face for Al. He jumped through so many hoops to make sure Beulah was taken care of, and that's the thanks he gets? Poor guy. Now I'm going to heat up some oil in a pan and saute red bell peppers and onion. Beulah said things weren't serious between her and Harry. She claimed she didn't love Harry and even elaborated to say, "I don't think I ever loved anybody very much. You know how it is. You keep looking and looking all the time for someone you can really love." Damn, that's deep. But as deep as that sounds, little Miss Beulah also seemed pretty shallow. She absolutely loved the attention she was getting and posed for every possible photo while Al tried to hide his face. This case really took Chicago by storm. Beulah was labeled the prettiest woman ever accused of slaying someone in Chicago, and it felt almost like she was getting praised for what she did. Once again, pretty privilege prevails. She had this whole PR campaign in the press that followed her journey to her hearing, which seemed more like a royal wedding or something, honestly. Beulah was really good at leaning into her emotions to try and sway the public to be on her side. She even pretended to be pregnant at one point, but never ended up having a child. When Al took the stand during his wife's hearing, he identified the .38 caliber revolver that Beulah used on Harry and just shook his head in response to all of the questions asked. But even though Beulah had already cheated on him, Al stood by her side throughout it all. He took out all of his money out of the bank and got her the best lawyers in town. Beulah was advised by her attorney to not make a statement, and she complied. When the decision was made that Beulah would be taken to trial on charges of manslaughter, she powdered her nose, took some money from her husband, and went back to jail. What an icon. In her jail cell, Beulah gave a bunch of interviews where she complained about not having cold cream, powder, or good music in prison. Beulah became an instant celebrity for no real reason, other than the fact that she was just the prettiest executioner to ever be jailed in the Windy City. In Illinois at the time, only men could serve on juries, which meant Beulah's case was presented to an all-male jury. Being the charming and stunning woman she was, people began to wonder what kind of effect Beulah would have on the jury. At her trial, she held firm to the claim that the only reason she grabbed the revolver is because Harry would have done it if she hadn't. Another important element brought up in court was Harry's criminal history. He had previously been charged for violating a woman, so it wasn't a stretch to assume he'd do something similar to Beulah. And since there was booze involved, it was pretty much a he said, she said type of case, and the jury was left with a lot of holes to fill for themselves. Actually, I guess it's more of a she said case because Harry wasn't alive to tell his side of the story. Well, in May of 1924, Beulah was found not guilty. She was acquitted on the slaughter charge and set free. Before leaving the courtroom, she kissed all of the jurors to express her gratitude. You know, I think a simple thank you would have sufficed. Beulah was over the moon about the decision, and so was her husband Al. He said, "I knew my wife would come through all right." That seemed to be the consensus of the opinion. But as supportive as Al had been, Beulah was eating up all of the fame and fortune of her trial and appeared to want more in a relationship. The day after she was freed, Beulah made the announcement that she was leaving her husband. Her reasoning? "He doesn't want me to have a good time. He never wants to go out anywhere, and he doesn't know how to dance. I'm not going to waste the rest of my life with him. He's too slow." The following year, the couple officially got divorced, and Beulah went on to marry and divorce another man before getting engaged for the fourth time. In 1928, Beulah got tuberculosis and passed away at the young age of 28. Dang. If there's one thing Beulah knew, it was how to jam-pack a full life into 28 years. 3 marriages, an engagement, a son, some jail time, a huge trial, and a whole lot of booze. So now it's time to meet our second Mary Murderess of the Cook County Jail, Belva Gaertner. While Beulah was known as the prettiest female slayer, Belva was the classiest. She was a 38-year-old cabaret singer who had just gone through a messy divorce with a millionaire named William Gaertner, who was 20 years older than her. I wonder what it was about William that initially won her over. Belva was rich and classy, but also loved to party and drink. By 1924, she was dating a younger man named Walter Law, who had a wife and kid of his own. On March 11th, 2 Cook County police officers found Walter's body slumped over the steering wheel of a car with an empty bottle of gin and a pistol on the floorboard. The car belonged to none other than Belva Gaertner. When officers visited Belva at her apartment, they noticed her clothes were covered in red stains. She also owned the firearm used to take Walter out and was frantically pacing around her apartment. Belva said she went with Walter, but had so much gin that she couldn't seem to remember what happened between leaving the cabaret and hearing a bullet ring out as Walter took a fatal blow to the head. She just kept saying, "I don't know, I was drunk." During a jailhouse interview with reporter Maurine, Belva said no woman can love a man enough to kill him. They aren't worth it, because there are always plenty more. Walter was just a kid. Why should I have worried whether he loved me or whether he left me? Gin and guns? Either one is bad enough, but together they get you in a dickens of a mess, don't they? Go off, sis. Now, even though Belva's crime took place before Beulah's, her trial didn't happen until 1 month after. During Belva's trial, the state presented this theory, that Belva snuffed Walter because he was planning on leaving her and sticking with his wife and family. Belva didn't want to lose him on those terms, and so instead, she whacked him. When a witness named Pale, yes, Pale, was brought to the stand, that's when things really started to get bad for Belva. Pale was one of Walter's coworkers who said Walter told him that week he was going to take out more life insurance because Belva threatened to snuff him. He told the jury about a time when Belva locked Walter in her apartment and told him she would jab him with a blade if he tried to leave. That's one way to keep a man. The assistant state's attorney Stanley said he thought Belva tried to get Walter to come up with her to her apartment after getting back from the cabaret that night. Since Belva had locked Walter in her apartment about 3 weeks prior, Stanley assumed Walter turned her down in fear of that happening again. Little did he know Belva would pull out a pistol. Stanley said he assumed there was a bit of a struggle, but at the end of the day, Belva won. Belva's team, however, kept up the story that Belva was too wasted to remember what happened. She claimed the only reason she kept that firearm on her was in case of a robbery. Her team said it was even possible that Walter pulled the trigger on himself. And it's times like these when I wish law enforcement had the same tools and technology as they do now, because a theory like this could have been easily proven or disproven. Just like Beulah's trial, Belva's took place in front of a jury of men, because women are incapable of making any decisions in court. On June 6th, Belva was found not guilty. When the decision was announced, Belva burst into laughter, gave her attorneys a big hug, and thanked the jury. Walter's wife did the exact opposite. She started bawling and nearly fainted. After Belva was freed, she went back to the Cook County Jail to collect her extensive wardrobe and went home with her sister. Within a month, she had already gotten back together with her ex-husband William and remarried him in 1925. The following year, William filed for divorce under the claim that Belva was abusive and constantly intoxicated. He also said she threatened to whack him after he found her with another man. And that part makes no sense to me. Why would the person cheating threaten their spouse like that? Isn't it typically the other way around? In November of 1926, Belva was caught for drunk driving, and after that, she avoided the law for the rest of her life. In 1930, she moved to Europe with William, which leads me to believe they never went through with the second divorce. 18 years later, William passed away, and Belva moved to Pasadena, California to live with her sister until she kicked the bucket in 1965 at 80 years old. So now I'm gonna start toasting bread and assembling the sandwiches. And here's where I'll connect the two cases for you. On the night of Beulah's crime, she met Belva in jail. By early April, they were posing for photos together, so it's safe to say the two girls hit it off. They were both the most popular of the women on Murderess Row. Beulah constantly received fan mail, flowers, candy, marriage proposals, and one time, she was even sent a steak dinner. Both Beulah and Belva swayed the Chicagoans' opinions with their stories of sleazy men, intoxication, and jazz clubs. This all took place right after the First World War, and it was the Prohibition era, and the suffrage movement was quickly gaining traction. Crime was at an all-time high, women were granted more freedoms, and firearms were becoming much more accessible. Chicago was a hotspot for jazz and bootlegging, so it's no surprise that's where most of these crimes took place. Now, a majority of the women who stood trial for snuffing men were acquitted. Most people say that's because juries in Illinois were all male, and most of these men believed women weren't capable of premeditated violence. They thought when a woman turned violent, there had to be a good reason for it. But that wasn't the case for all of the women at the Cook County Jail. While Belva and Beulah were seen as classy and beautiful women who wouldn't end someone's life without a valid reason, an Italian woman named Sabella had a different reputation. She went to trial for slaying her husband several months before the two other girls and was found guilty by all 12 jurors. She was actually the first woman to ever be sentenced to hang in Cook County, Illinois. Now, Sabella didn't even speak English, so when the decision of her sentencing was announced, she didn't even know what anyone was saying. It took 24 hours until someone got an interpreter to break the news to Sabella. I cannot believe that. There's no way no one knew Sabella didn't speak English before taking her to court. Poor girl just sat and watched while people discussed her fate in a different language. That's harsh. Now I'm going to assemble the sandwiches by layering the seitan with the bell peppers and onions, sauerkraut, a sprinkle of cheese, and Thousand Island dressing. As if things weren't already awful for Sabella in the courtroom, reports in the newspaper weren't any better. In various articles that covered Sabella's case, she was described as greasy, dirty, and a disheveled woman who was cruel and repulsive. So the pretty girls were left off the hook, but not Sabella? It's starting to seem like these all-dude juries were biased as hell. So before Sabella's execution date, and after she had already tried twice to end her own life, she met Belva and Beulah in jail. She was hired by both women to do their laundry and clean. In turn, the fashionable celebrity wannabes decided to clean up Sabella's look and give her a makeover. Belva and Beulah showed Sabella how to do her hair and makeup and decked her out in a fancy dress, silk stockings, shoes, and a fur-trimmed coat. In her new look, Sabella appeared before the Supreme Court of Illinois that had granted her a retrial, And in December of 1924, she was found not guilty and got released from prison. OMG. If that isn't proof that the jury favored pretty girls, I don't know what is. It really is wild to think that so many women were getting set free from prison despite the evidence piled up against them. And I bet if there were some chicks on the jury, the verdicts would have been different. Well, if there's anything to take away from all of this, it's that sexism is real. A cute hairdo may help you get out of jail free. And a Reuben sandwich makes for a great meal. Thanks for watching, everyone.